What we can see behind us is one of the very first passive houses in the UK. So Passive House sort of started with some experimental houses in Germany in the early 90s, a physicist called Dr. Wolfgang Feist who led that initiative, and out of that has grown an international movement and standard for really low energy, really comfortable buildings. We got involved in the early noughties, interested in Passive House, and then we got the opportunity to persuade clients to go for Passive House, and this is our first Passive House and one of the first in the UK.
We didn't know anything about Passive House, but we knew about the Green Building Store and walked into their offices on a Friday evening about 10 to 5 and said, we'd like to build an eco house. What do you think? I think they nearly kicked us out because they wanted to go home. They told us about Passive House. Never heard anything about it. We thought, what is all this? Started on several discussions. One of the guys does the PHPP had said my wife wouldn't live in one because of noise, and we thought, well, this is a bit, we ought to just see what this is about. We actually went to Austria. It must have been it was winter, and we were shown a couple of passive houses. They are really quiet. So it was the MVHR, it's no problem with the sound of it. And that's what we found when we actually moved into the house.
And that's the crux of this really. Why haven't we got a performance gap? Why is it performing and why haven't we got a performance gap? So it is literally using a good methodology, better quality building, just attention to detail, and then quality assurance. I mean, you wouldn't sell a widget without quality. A kettle you expect to be quality assured, and yet houses aren't. The most expensive thing we ever built isn't built. They're not quality assured. You have building control who do the minimal amount of quality assurance because that's, well, A, that's what they're really qualified to do, and B, they don't have resources. When we built this house, putting natural gas in it actually was the lowest carbon solution at the time because our grid was still very heavily very carbonised, our electricity. It's now decarbonising very fast. So now a heat pump will be much better for carbon emissions than gas. So you imagine the air is moving around the building. It's coming into these living spaces, going out through the sort of wet spaces like the bathroom and kitchen.
So you could simplify it and say 4 key elements of a passive house are mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which you wanted to install because you want good air tightness and you want good levels of insulation, and you also want high performing windows, so you want triple glazing. Those are your kind of 4 key bits, but it's the knowledge that ties all those elements together which is really important, and frankly that's what Green Building Store's got in spades, and so very much it's about engaging with the customer, often the architect, like I say, developer, homeowner, actually helping them understand what they need to do, what they need to put into place, and then obviously supplying those products so that they all kind of connect up properly. You can have a great product like a window and a great wall, but if the two aren't interfaced properly, then you can actually completely compromise the final performance of the building.
So now we know how to build buildings well and to make them energy efficient and comfortable. There is another issue, which is the energy involved in the materials that go into the building and the environmental footprint of those materials. This is built with concrete blocks on the inside, and concrete has a very high carbon footprint. So really, when we came to Sheepridge, our last project, which we're just completing, we looked at that again and said, well, can we get around that? Can we get away from that and use materials that have much lower impact on the environment?
We're in Sheepridge, Huddersfield, at our latest Passive House project, single house for Jane and Paul, who had designed this house probably 6 years ago. They came to us probably 2 years ago and said they potentially wanted to make it Passive House. And we said, well, the shape's very good. So that's the relationship between the floor area and the external envelope. It wasn't complicated, and we thought we could make it Passive House relatively easy. And so we carried on doing detailed design, and here we are 2 years later with it nearly finished.
It started off interesting because we were lived in a 1911 bungalow. We were paying £500 going upwards towards 1,000 for gas and electric, and we'd got plans in to build a house, and we hadn't initially intended doing passive house, but what we wanted to do was build a well insulated house. It was all during the pandemic, and we couldn't get a decent price off a builder, and I knew Bill Butcher fairly well, known him for nearly 30 years. And we sat around with Bill and he started drawing details of sections through the building and what it meant and where the coal bridging was. And as an architect anyway, I knew quite a lot about passive house, and when he said let's do passive house, and my husband went, okay, let's go for it. So that was where it came from, really.
So we've got this, it's got insulation under the slab, under a concrete slab, and you've got a reinforced concrete slab. So and then at the edge, the hard thing with any building is what happens, how you join up, because you don't want cold to come through where you haven't got insulation. So it's quite complicated to check that. So basically, underneath the timber frame comes down to here, and then this bit is not timber frame. It's because it's in the ground. You don't want timber in the ground. So we've got insulation between. It's more like a cavity window. Yeah. So it's carefully done to see that you don't get cold through there. But there's taping and damp proof and all that business to make that work. In fact, in this house we've got a small upstand of insulation on the edge of that concrete slab, that reinforced concrete slab.
Go for it, do it, because it seems so obvious to me that you build a house that's efficient, it works, it does what it says on the can, if you like. But yeah, I can't understand why not every house is built like this.